Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Big week for Indiana. 2 games. First up, North Carolina on Wednesday at Assembly Hall before traveling for the Big Ten opener this weekend at Rutgers. But all of the attention right now is on the North Carolina game. And to help preview this game, as I mentioned, I think when William was on the show a couple weeks ago, we have a 3-man podcast today. 2 North Carolina experts on the show, William McDermott of Inside the Hall, Tyler Tachman of the Indianapolis Star, are here. Guys, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having us on again.
I know you guys can't see me, but Durham has an incredible mustache that I cannot pull off myself. So I know you guys can't see us, but I wanted to give a visual.
Incredible might be an overstatement, but it's okay.
No, it's pretty spectacular. But yeah, we'll let's get into this game because it's obviously lost a little bit of its luster with North Carolina losing 2 games out in Portland. They went from number 1 to number 18 in the AP poll, I believe. I think I saw a stat that it's the largest drop ever for a team in the AP poll, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That I get that they dropped pretty far, but it wasn't like they were completely embarrassed in 2 games or anything has really necessarily changed about North Carolina. We knew going into the season that there were a lot of expectations, but also last year's team lost a lot of games and really got hot at the right time of the season and made that run, and that is what fueled their preseason ranking. William, through their first couple of games here and just what you've seen so far, you and Tyler, full disclosure, grew up watching North Carolina, know a ton about the program. That's why I wanted to have you both on. But what have you seen maybe out of them so far this season? Mike Woodson was asked the other night by a reporter about them underperforming so far. And Mike Woodson kind of scoffed at that and said, hey, they're unbeaten. They're probably going to be unbeaten when they come to Bloomington. That's obviously not the case. And anyone that watched their first couple of games where they struggled with some lesser opponents knows that they haven't played particularly well. What's, in your eyes, what are kind of the issues so far right now with this North Carolina team?
Well, I think they're just in a little bit of a hangover from last season. And I think it's a lot of the same problems they had last year. Depth is a big problem for Carolina. I mean, they only go about 7 deep. Puff Johnson and DeMarco Dunn off the bench is kind of what Hubert Davis has been going with. And when you play a 4 overtime game against a fast-paced team like Alabama, like you're going to get worn down. And I think, in that game, it was just a mess for both teams. I worry. I think Carolina's guards aren't making shots right now. And down the stretch of their season last year, that's what made them so dangerous. Caleb Love could go off any night, hit 5 threes. RJ Davis was not turning the ball over, getting into the paint, finding his spots in the mid-range. And when those guards can create for themselves and do that, it really makes Carolina a very dangerous team. But right now they're not shooting well. I think one thing a lot of people expected Pete Nance to be similar to Brady Manick, I think, in the Carolina universe. And I think now they're starting to realize that he's a very different player. Yeah, he can stretch the floor. But when you think of Brady Manick, you just think of like a pure shooter. That's at least what I think of with him. I think Nance can do a little bit of everything. He's not as good of a shooter as Manick. And they're not rebounding well. And I think, I was talking to somebody else about this, but, with the Roy era at Carolina, it was we're going to have 2 big men who can rebound the ball, pass the ball well on the fast break and run in transition. That was the bread and butter. And Hubert has gone to, he wants to stretch the floor, and that's modern day basketball. That's fine if that's his philosophy. But I think with the players they have, and Baycott has kind of just been, a stick in the post for them. They've really struggled this season rebounding the basketball and getting out in transition, which, keep in mind, almost all of the players are players who Roy recruited and Roy wanted on this team. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think watching the Alabama game, I was pretty shocked and disappointed by how bad some of the late game sets were for Carolina, especially in overtime. I think it was the first overtime. There was one they had 30 seconds and they just had Caleb Love isolation dribble the ball, and they didn't even come set a screen or anything. And he just jacked up a step back three. And it was like, you got to get something going to the rim. I'm not concerned. I think they'll put it together by the end of the year. I think they're better this year than they were last year this time. But I think those are the main concerns for now.
Tyler, how surprised are you that with the preseason expectations, what they did in the tournament last year, and the fact that they went into this season ranked number 1? So you expect a team that's ranked number 1 in the preseason to be pretty good from the get-go. How surprised are you that they have underperformed to this point? And then William talked a little bit about some of the things that need to get better. Obviously, what chances do they have to develop some depth on this roster moving forward that can maybe help them the rest of the way?
To me, this early season has basically been an indication that I think North Carolina can still win a national championship, but they're just much further away from that right now than people expected them to be. The people expected them to come out as maybe a front runner early, and I think they can still get there eventually, but there's still a wide gap, to get back there. And just looking at some, I guess the issues is, to kind of put this in Indiana terms, I feel like Caleb Love is very similar to what Xavier Johnson was last season for Indiana, to where if he's rolling, Carolina has a really good chance to win. If he's not, Carolina didn't, in the same sense that if last season Xavier Johnson was playing really well, Indiana had a really good chance to win. And if he wasn't, they were put at a pretty steep disadvantage. And one of the issues I have with Hubert Davis, he's still a young coach trying to figure things out, but he doesn't really give a chance to the Carolina bench. He's almost like the anti-Mike Woodson, in that Mike Woodson, especially last season, played more guys and expanded rotation than I think some people would have liked. And Hubert Davis, even in these early season games, I don't think they're playing a limited number of guys because they don't have the guys. It's just because Hubert Davis is not giving them a chance. They have guys that sat on the bench in that Alabama game for either all or most of the game that I think were capable of making an impact. Dontrez Styles is a guy who has shown flashes of potential. I don't even know if he played against Alabama. I think he played a few minutes, but it was really sparingly. Tyler Nickel, who's a freshman, I don't think even played. So there is the depth there. It just seems like Hubert's unwilling to go into it. And I think that's where Indiana, just given the circumstances of Carolina playing 3 games in 4 days, playing in Portland, Armando Bacot seems like he might be a little banged up, where Indiana's depth can really cause issues for North Carolina, because I just don't know if North Carolina is going to have the legs at this point to keep up.
William, what have you seen out of Hubert just in terms of the unwillingness to use the bench, and why do you think maybe that is? Is it just he's riding with the guys that got him to the national championship last game? Because at some point you do have to develop players from the future, and it seems like North Carolina is obviously looking for a big season this year and wants to have like a repeat run to the Final Four. But thinking about the future, a lot of the guys that are on this team this season aren't going to be around in the seasons to come, and you also got to have some guys that you can trust in future years. So why do you think maybe he's been unwilling to use the bench more than he has?
Well, I think when you look at Carolina's bench, aside from Puff Johnson, I mean, a lot of these, they're underclassmen. Dontrez Styles, he's a guy that I think most people were pretty high on coming into the season. He played pretty well in the late stretch of the season last year for Carolina. I remember that Baylor game in the second round of the NCAA tournament. He played huge minutes and he played really well. He was guarding Matthew Meyer and he could defend, but it just seems like I don't know what happened. I don't know if he's not playing, he's not practicing well. Maybe he's a little injured, but Hubert just won't play him. And I think for everybody else, it's important to keep in mind, Seth Trimble, freshman, Jalen Washington, he's been injured. He's a freshman who Hubert Davis apparently said he can shoot the ball as well as any big man he's ever seen. Tyler Nickel, he played a little bit in that Iowa State game and he did not look good. Or was it the Portland game? I can't remember. But I just think he's giving them chances in the blowout games. Like in the first few games of the season, he gave them chances. Seth Trimble is a guy who I think should be getting more playing time. He's a freshman, very talented. He looks good. He came in and he had a great defensive play in one of the overtimes against Alabama to knock the ball out of bounds. I just think Hubert Davis I don't want to say he's scared. I just don't think he's very trusting of his team right now. And I know I already talked about it, but I have enough to say about how he's handled the late game situations. And it's not a lot of good things. But I think with the rotation, early on in the season in these games, this is when you're supposed to be expanding your depth and getting these guys playing time. So, because next year, North Carolina is not going to have Leaky Black or Pete Nance or Armando Bacot, and they might not have Caleb Love or RJ Davis. So it's you're going to have to, at some point, develop depth. You can't just live through the portal, which is what the direction seems like it's going.
In this specific matchup against Indiana, Tyler, what do you see as the areas that Indiana can exploit other than depth on North Carolina's team right now?
The biggest thing that this matchup comes down to me for, when I guess you kind of get really into it, at least from my opinion, is that Indiana needs to stop RJ Davis and Caleb Love. To me, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple as that. I think, if those two guys go off for 30 points each, it's going to make it very difficult for Indiana to win. But I think, that's where it seemed like a lot that duo carrying Carolina is when they can get really dangerous. I think Indiana has the big men to slow down Armando Bacot. I think that Indiana also needs to shoot well from three. I think to me, those are the two biggest keys, is that stopping Caleb Love and RJ Davis and Indiana hitting threes. And to me, it's interesting because from a defensive standpoint of who's going to be guarding Indiana, Leaky Black, one of the best defenders in the country, who is Carolina going to stick him on? Are they going to put him on Xavier Johnson, which might make sense because he is Indiana's best creator, a lot of people would argue. But then you have RJ Davis, who's extremely undersized, and I'm curious who Carolina is going to put him on, because if you put him on Jalen Hood-Schifino, that's a massive height difference. If you put him on Xavier Johnson, I don't know if RJ Davis has the physicality to handle him. I feel like there's a lot of, at least in the guard department, there's a lot of matchups that Indiana can exploit, just given their length, athleticism, and strength. So I'm curious kind of how that shakes out, but also just trying to keep North Carolina off the boards. And, that's something that's kind of patented in the program. Armando Bacot can get rebounds. Leaky Black can get rebounds. And we've seen Indiana be susceptible to allow offensive rebounds so far this season. So I think, limiting those second chance points as much as possible will also be important.
William, when you look at the front court matchups too, it seems like Indiana has an advantage there as well, especially considering Bacot coming in. I watched the post-game interview that he did in the hallway last night in Portland. He said he had a sharp pain in his ankle, which doesn't necessarily sound good. I know he was on the bench for a lot of the overtime in the game last night against Alabama. And you just look at what Indiana can do in terms of throwing the ball into the post and picking up fouls and just going right at somebody. They've got Trace Jackson Davis. They've got Race Thompson. They've got Malik Renew. They've got Jordan Geronimo, who will attack the basket and draw fouls. Coupled with the fact that North Carolina doesn't seem to have a big bench, it seems really important for North Carolina to have Bacot as close to 100% as possible. on Wednesday, and they may have to play a deeper rotation if foul trouble arises, because I just don't know. Indiana's basically got 15 fouls to give with Race, Malik, and Trace Jackson Davis. You throw in Geronimo, it just seems like Indiana has a decided advantage there with the front court depth.
Yeah, I mean, Carolina really doesn't play a traditional backup big man. Puff Johnson has some length, but he's not the strongest guy. Jalen Washington, I think, is a guy who they wanted to develop into that role, but he's been banged up. He hasn't played. I don't, and I think Tyler really nailed it on the head with this. I just think Indiana, with the matchups, is at such an advantage. I think he talked about the guards, but in terms of the big men, like I think Race Thompson and Pete Nance are similar players. I think Trace Jackson Davis is just going to abuse Armando Bacot. I really do. I think with his speed and quickness, I don't think Armando is going to be able to keep up with him, especially if TJD's running the floor like he has been and he's healthy. I think that's another important thing going to the game. Is he going to be fully healthy? But I think what we saw Trace do in the Xavier game against Nunji, just kind of abusing that baseline, using his quickness as soon as he gets the ball, quick jab step, stuff like that. Armando is really going to struggle with. I think rebounding wise, I could see Armando give Trace some troubles. I just without a healthy Armando Bacot, I don't think North Carolina has a chance. I mean, even with him healthy, I think it's already a slim possibility that Carolina comes into Assembly Hall and wins. I just think, Trace Jackson Davis and Armando Bacot, both great players, but they both do so many different things. And I think the matchup is just offensively, the advantage goes to TJD.
Tyler, thoughts on that matchup, and also how North Carolina deals with the fact that not only they have to deal with TJD, but Renew can come in also and give you 10 to 12 points off the bench.
I will say, just with the TJD Armando matchup, that I think Armando is more physical than Trace. I think he might have the ability to bully Trace around a little bit in the paint, as we kind of previously saw Kofi could do and Hunter Dickinson could do, and now Trace in the Big Ten tournament had good games against them. But I think Armando has a little bit of an advantage in that category, but he is not close to as athletic or quick as Trace. And that's where I think you can see Trace really exploit that, facing up on him, maybe hitting a jab step, something like that, where he can use his speed and getting out in transition on him. And I think just more generally of this matchup, I feel like at least externally, the narrative of this game has changed. I think before you look at this game, you're like, this is a game that Indiana would really like to win. I think now, given the circumstances, given how Carolina's playing, given what they've, playing in Portland and now having to come to Bloomington, I feel like this is a game Indiana needs to win. It just seems like a game that, it being an Assembly Hall too, it feels like this is a game that Indiana just needs to get the job done. And I don't know if we would have been saying that, at the beginning of the season, where obviously it's a game that Indiana could win, but it felt like more of a toss-up. I think that given the circumstances, the way that we've seen Indiana play too, getting the win at Xavier, I feel like this is one they need to just take care of business and move on to the next.
In terms of the impact of the games that they played in three games in 4 days in Portland, obviously we know they played 4 overtimes against Alabama. William, how big of an impact? I mean, is that going to be overplayed in terms of what that took out of them, and also having to travel back east, or do you think that actually has some bearing on how this game could go?
Absolutely. I think especially if North Carolina is a little bit banged up. Leaky Black turned his ankle in that Alabama game. He ended up coming back in. That's North Carolina's best defender. Armando Bacot banged up. It's with the lack of depth they have, they really can't afford to have injuries in these big games. And I think, Tyler started talking about this a little bit, and I agree with him. I think, a couple months ago or even a week ago, people were talking about this game as, well, it's kind of a toss up. If Indiana wins, they win. It's a great win. But if not, it's not the end of the world. But now with the circumstances, I mean, it's changed. Indiana needs to win this game if they want to assert themselves into the national conversation. They're on their home floor, and to bring up North Carolina's horrible history in the ACC Big Ten Challenge at Assembly Hall, it's been rough when they've played here. So I expect the environment to get to them a little bit. It's going to be North Carolina's first true road game of the season. And you're coming off 3 games in 4 days. You're across the country. They have to go back to Chapel Hill, then probably back to Bloomington tomorrow. So they're banged up. They're coming off 2 losses. It's just not shaping up to be a welcome circumstance for North Carolina. And I think the tournament in Portland, while I think in the long run it's going to do some good things for them, I think maybe it'll change Hubert's mind. If I need to play more guys, I need to do this at the end of the game. And getting guys conditioned, they learn how to lose. They learn what they need to work on. But I think playing a team like Indiana on the road for the first time of the season with injuries and limited depth, I think it's a recipe for disaster.
Tyler, we've seen Jalen Hood-Schifino play good this season in spurts, but overall, you look at his shooting numbers, they've been underwhelming. There was a lot of talk in the preseason about him being a potential one-and-done player. It seems like he's kind of the missing piece, I guess, moving forward for Indiana. If they can get him going, all of a sudden, you look at how Xavier Johnson's playing, you look at Trace Jackson-Davis, you look at Renew off the bench, Miller Kopp making threes, Brace Thompson, you know what he's going to bring you for the most part, night in and night out. Hood-Schifino hasn't been that guy. What have you seen out of him so far? And is this a potential spot for him to kind of come out and make a statement and have a big game? It feels like he's yet to do that this season, and it's been a little not say confusing, but surprising to me that he hasn't been more efficient so far, just given how strong he is. It feels like he could do maybe a little bit better job of getting in the lane using his body rather than settling for jump shots. But overall, I would say if you look at Indiana's roster through 6 games, he's been maybe the most underwhelming guy so far, at least in the starting lineup.
Well, he hasn't shot the ball well, and that has been a little bit of an issue. I think he's still making the guys around him better, and I think that's kind of an important thing to take into consideration, is that he's passing pretty well. I think in the Little Rock game he had a fair amount of turnovers, but he's passing the ball well. He's playing defense well. I think you would like him to get to the rim more often, but I think you want him to keep shooting as well. I think you want him taking good shots, but I think if they're open, you want him to keep shooting. And if he can turn into a guy that can make threes consistently, that just opens up even more doors in the offense. But to me, just his skill set and versatility, whether he's making those shots or not, changes the game for Indiana. Because really, you look at him, you take out Parker Stewart, who transferred out this offseason, you put in him, and Parker Stewart, if he wasn't scoring, there was very little contributions he was making. Jalen Hood-Schifino, if he's not scoring, he can still impact the game in various ways. And now that's not to say you don't want him to score, but just that dynamic and the versatility he has, even if he's not scoring, kind of changes the complexity of IU's defense or just of IU's offense and what they can do as a unit. So it is a little bit concerning. I wouldn't push the panic button yet. I think in the exhibition games, we saw him take very similar shots to what he has early in the season, and he was making them during the exhibitions. And I think that's the hype kind of increased a little bit during those two exhibitions. But yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned yet. I think you need to let him kind of work through the struggles, and part of that is just might being a freshman, getting used to the college game and all that entails.
So are you guys both picking North Carolina or Indiana to win on Wednesday? I want to get you both on record with a prediction. I'll say Indiana will win. I don't know the total of how big it'll be, but I was there for the Zeller game, and I think it was 2012, 2013 season where Indiana played really well and beat North Carolina. And then there was another season. I want to say maybe it was Crean's last season. They played North Carolina.
Yeah, it was
home.
The year Carolina won the national championship, 2016, 2017. So
yeah, and Indiana won that game too. So it just has the makings of one of those Assembly Hall games where it's a late tip. The fans are like worked up all day towards the game. You're going to have the students lined up. You're going to have, a fan base that's been craving a moment like this on the national stage with the team coming in, that they're going to be jacked up to watch play. It just feels like a classic spot for Indiana to come out and get a big win. William, you can go first, and then Tyler, to you on just kind of your predictions and what you expect to see on Wednesday.
Yeah, I have Indiana by like 8 to 10 points. I just, something I wanted to mention about North Carolina is they're giving up over 9 threes a game, and they're letting teams shoot 35, almost 36% from deep. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for guys like Xavier Johnson and Miller Kopp and Jalen Hood-Schifino to make shots in Tamar Bates. So I think if Indiana's making some of their shots and they're running the floor in transition and they're defending like they know how to defend, I think they'll be just fine, especially with the circumstance for North Carolina right now. So that's my prediction: Indiana by 8 to 10 points.
I think I would be shocked if North Carolina comes and wins. The one thing I would say is that that North Carolina does have going for it is that just the experience of playing in really big games, and not that Indiana doesn't, but this North Carolina, a lot of guys on this North Carolina team have played in a Final Four, have played in a national championship game. The furthest that IU has gone is the first round of the NCAA tournament. So I guess that's the one little thing I look at as maybe UNC having an advantage. But I would be shocked if North Carolina comes and wins. I think Indiana has the potential to blow them out of the water, win by double digits, win pretty handily. I just think it's a really tough matchup for North Carolina. And given that, it's in Assembly Hall, the atmosphere, I'm looking forward to experiencing it. I just have a hard time seeing UNC winning. I think IU is going to win and has a chance to do it pretty easily.
Thanks, guys, for making the time to come on the show this week. I really appreciate it. Tyler will have coverage at indystar.com. William, of course, will have coverage at Inside the Hall. I encourage you to check out the work that both of them are doing. Both do an excellent job. It'll be, I think, a great moment for them as students getting to cover an atmosphere like the one they'll see Wednesday, plus the team that they really have both followed growing up, coming into town. So cool to see them play as well. I think it'll be an awesome night. I think just overall, I've been to some really big games at Assembly Hall, and there's really nothing like it when there's a big night. So it should be a fun game. As for Podcast on the Brink, we'll have 2 episodes this week. We'll be back later in the week to preview the Big Ten opener at Rutgers. So Indiana will either be coming off a big win against North Carolina, or they'll be coming off a letdown potentially if they can't take care of business Wednesday. But either way, a really big game coming up on Saturday on the road at Rutgers, the Big Ten opener. So thanks everybody, as always, for listening to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.